guys, welcome back. We're so excited to be putting out another video. We got a whole bunch of requests for Annie
I am your wife.
for Fannie to do just like give it a story of her whole Amish background.
I guess I'll start when I was born. I was born Amish to my parents who were also Amish, and I was born in northern Wisconsin. My dad, we had our own farm for a little bit, and then he sold that, and he also at some point was in the logging business, so he cut down trees for a logger in the area. And he did a lot of odd jobs. He worked for other dairy farmers as well, so he was kind of all over, and did all kinds of things. I guess one of my earliest memories. Can I insert a funny story?
Sure.
And I was really young. This is probably one of my earliest memories. We were living in the farms, so we had a lot of stray cats and dogs. And one particular cat stood out to me. I don't remember what I named it. It was a orange tabby cat. Those are tabby cats. No.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, tabby cat.
So I had this very cute little orange kitty. I don't like cats today, but I did when I was a child. Anyway, I had this cute little kitty, and I loved it very dearly, and I would follow this cat everywhere. But, and in a different part of it, my parents taught me to never follow an animal across the road. And I learned this thing very well. So one day, my sweet little kitty was sitting in the very center of the road because it was a sunny day out, so the pavement was very warm. And I was sitting at the edge of the grass, so I was almost on the road. But I was watching my kitty because I knew that there was going to be a vehicle that would come and kill this kitty. So I was like trying to lure this kitty off the road, but it was not moving, and I knew I was not allowed to go get it. So I sat there trying to lure this stupid kitty off the road, and it didn't move. And all of a sudden, I hear a truck coming, and I panicked, and I was so worried about my kitty, and I was trying so hard to here, come here, kitty, and it just would not come. And the truck was getting closer, and I knew that the kitty would get run over. Anyway, this kitty was sitting right in the middle. Had it not moved, it would have been fine. But right as the truck came, it decided to move and was completely squished.
That's not a funny story.
Well, it is now to me.
That's really morbid. Here, listen to this funny story about this kitten I was watching, and then it moved and got ran over by a truck.
Let me finish.
Oi.
So anyway, I jump
Dead
and
cat.
scream up and I'm jumping up and down and screaming my head off because I was terribly sad about this kitten. But then this
As
truck
you
driver,
should be.
This kind guy who felt so bad, he stopped and gave me ice cream, and everything was well. That's the story.
She got ice cream from a dead cat.
No, not from
That's funny. Haha.
Not from the dead cat.
Well, it was because the cat died.
Yeah, because of it. That's
Okay.
different. Anyway,
Wait,
that was
link into your
that was
Amish
one of my
background?
earliest memories. I
Oh,
think I was
okay.
2 or 3 when that happened, and I vividly remember it. And another memory I have is my dad would do chores, and so he'd have a bucket of grain in one hand and a bucket of me in the other, and that's the way we did chores. I remember having horses and riding to church in buggies.
Wait, tell them when you left. What age you were when you left.
I went just insert it.
Yeah, right now.
Okay. I just turned 7 when we had left the Amish, so all of these memories are before this. I had very vivid memories as a child. I also remember in the summer times we'd always have gigantic gardens. My mother is a huge gardener, still is, and I remember Christmases getting together with family.
What's Amish Christmas like?
Usually it's not a ton of presents. No trees, no decorations really. Sometimes at school, and school would put on a program. I did participate in one of those. And then
do you guys have trees?
No,
decorated trees or anything?
No decorations, no trees. At school, the most we do is, when you fold the paper or whatever and you cut out snowflakes.
Yeah.
We do that, or there's those things that they're folded flat and then you unfold them like this, and then there's a ball of paper. And
those fancy artsy craft things.
So then we didn't really have Christmas decorations, But we'd get together with family on, I think, Christmas Day, and we would have a whole display of candy out. Like everybody made homemade candy, and that was a big thing. And you pigged out that day. Like you ate so much food that you like completely regretted it. You felt unwell for the rest of like the day and possibly the week too. There was just a lot of food. The biggest things we got as gifts, I don't know personally for me, but my parents, um, like on Christmas Day, especially when they were growing up, they would get an orange on their plate on Christmas morning, and that was their gift they got. Maybe a piece of gum, but that was.
Keep yawning.
Are you that tired?
I'm tired.
When I was 6, I started school in the fall, and I remember being super duper excited. I don't remember really about my first day. I just remember that we were supposed to speak English, and I didn't really know any English. So I struggled with that. But I learned pretty quickly. And I remember getting in a fight with my cousin over how to say an English word, I think. And we were like arguing it out. And finally we took it to the teacher. I'm like, how do you say this? Because we're fighting about it. So I think she finally disputed. I don't remember who won, but I'm pretty sure I was right.
Do you remember what word it was?
I don't remember. I think it was honestly about how to, maybe it was how to write something, and I think it was how to write the cursive S. But we were struggling, like having this argument because we didn't know English. So there was like a language barrier because we had to speak English, but we didn't know it. So it was really hard arguing. Yeah, next time you're in an argument, try arguing in a language you don't know. So it makes it pretty difficult.
That would be
fun. I remember packing my lunch. For a short time, I lived with my grandparents going to school. So I remember one time my grandma took these special salt and pepper shakers, and they were shaped like tree stumps. And she put them in my lunch. She's like, okay, now be careful. Like, do not shake your lunch pail. And I took it to school, and I swear I did not shake my lunch that day. But when I came home, it was broken, and my grandma was not very happy with me. I remember being teased incessantly by my uncles. They made my life difficult when I was with them. They would just tease me all the time. I'm sure it was mostly out of love. I remember being responsible for chores. I remember going out and helping my parents. I loved milking cows because we milked it by hand. So I had a special cup out in the barn, and my parents would always like fresh from the cow just milk into the cup and then give it to me. But that was a good memory I had. I remember, like, I had chores. I helped mom wash dishes. I don't know. Like, for fun time, I had an Amish doll. It had no face on it. So I took care of that problem, and I drew with a marker on the head of the doll. But my mom was very upset with that because that's not okay. And so she took a cloth and like put it over top of the doll and like put a string around it and put the dress on top of it so you couldn't see the face. Because they're not allowed to have actual dolls. Although in some communities they were, and I remember being so jealous of this girl, because she had a doll with like an actual like a hard head.
Oh.
I don't know.
Can they have faces? In some communities?
In some communities, just not mine. And so I was always like, why can't I have a doll like that? That's not even fair. So I had a piece of wood. It was probably like that tall. It was painted yellow, but the paint was peeling. And it was like a 2x4 just cut off. And for whatever reason, this piece of wood was named Levi, and he was my 2-year-old son. We weren't allowed to have our dolls outside, so I made do with a stick, or like a piece of wood, and that was my doll. And that was kind of what we did for entertainment. We played church. We played like we were moms, and we had our dolls and our purses and stuff like that. The actual story
of leaving, yeah.
My dad and my dad and my mom were always very good Amish people. They're not the type that were like living to the edge of like the rules or whatever and trying to work around them. Like they always obeyed it, and they always obeyed them from like a safe from a safe distance. And they never crowded the line. They were good Amish people. And especially my mom, she was very, very strict, and she did everything she possibly could to obey these rules. A lot of people by surprise, especially my mom. Medford is the oldest Amish community in the state of Wisconsin, and it is a very strict one. They don't change their rules very often. But But then my dad ended up moving up north to Chautauqua, and that was when he was a teenager, I think. So they lived in two different communities, and then the way they met was my mom's brothers were living in Chautauqua, and she would come and basically be like a live-in nanny for them. And that's the way my parents met, was going to the same church like that. And then they got married. They had me, my sister, brother, and then right before we left, they had my little sister Linda. So where it kind of started was we were living on a farm job. So my dad was a herdsman at this farm, and he was doing a really good job. But at this particular time, our boss fired us.
Fired your dad.
Or fired my dad. And this was in the middle of winter. We had a herd of cows that we had just kind of integrated into his herd. So we had a lot of cows, plus we had a family. Like, we can't just move anywhere. It is the middle of winter. So we need a barn that is winterized and ready to milk. And we also need a house that's big enough for our family. So at this point,
because you were renting from him. Did
yeah,
you say that?
Yeah, we were living.
Yeah, you were living on his property.
We were living on his property, so we were stuck there. And
so when he fired your dad, then it was kind of like find somewhere else to live too.
Right, and we had 30 days to do so, I believe. He gave us a time limit, which was terrible. So my dad was beside himself with, like, I don't know what to do. Like, I have nowhere to go. We were planning to move to my grandparents in the spring, but we needed to winterize the barn, or like make the barn ready, and there needed to be food there for the cows, and they needed to move a trailer house onto my grandparents' property. So none of that was ready to go. So we weren't able to move to my grandparents right away. So we were forced to move out. And at that point, my dad actually prayed to God and asked, like, look, we need help. We have nowhere else to go.
Which is interesting because, like, the Amish don't
pray. They have a prayer book that they pray out of, but most of the time they don't understand what they're praying anyway. So to pray just out of your heart is very abnormal for an Amish person. But my dad didn't know what to do. But thankfully, God had plans, and through, I don't remember how it came to be, but we did end up finding a farm and moving out within a certain amount of days. And we moved our herd of cows. Luckily, the farmer that we moved it to had literally sold his cows like 2 weeks before, and so the barn was ready to go. They hadn't shut anything off. All the hot, like the warm water was still in there, so no frozen pipes or anything. So it was just amazing to see how God worked that all out, and we moved there. But we weren't really part of a church because the community we were a part of was kind of falling apart at the time. So I don't remember what we did during that time. I'd have to ask my dad. But it was a really hard time because my dad wanted to be with his dad or whatever on his home farm, but wasn't able to. So anyway, fast forward a little bit, we moved to this farm. When we moved, it was about January, and then fast forward to about September. My dad was looking to move in the spring, but the barn still wasn't ready. So what his plan was to rent out his herd of cows to different farmers in the area, and then get it ready, and then move his cows home. And he needed people, so I don't remember how he advertised, but he somehow advertised, and this one particular person came to look at his cows to see if he wanted them. And the guy was interested in the cows, but more so than that, he was interested in talking to my dad. And he asked, I don't know how the conversation got started, but he asked my dad if he was born again. And my dad told him, well, of course, like, I'm Amish, and I live by the rules. I'm a good Amish person. I'm born again. And so the guy asked him, do you have a testimony? And my dad didn't know what a testimony was. So he explained it, that it's how you came to faith in Christ, and it's your story. And my dad said, well, I was baptized. And the man said, well, baptism isn't going to get you to heaven, and it's not born again. And so my dad was like, well, I still think I'm saved. And the guy asked him again, like, are you born again? And my dad was like, well, like, I guess I'm not. And so the guy left him with a few scripture verses about not even being able to see the kingdom of heaven if you are not born again. And my dad was left to think about these things, and he could not shake those thoughts. He just kept going over them in his mind over and over again. And he told my mom about the conversation, but he assured her that there was no doubt in his mind that the Amish was the right way to live. And my dad could not shake that. So a few days later, he calls him back up again, and this was the series of a start of a lot of conversations, like back and forth, and asking about the Bible and what the Amish believe, and trying to understand how all these things work together. And um, eventually, he came into contact. This guy was not former Amish, but he knew how they thought. Um, Eventually, he came in contact with a few other Amish people that, or a few other ex-Amish people that had been Amish a couple of years ago. And so he got to talking with them and asked them why they left. And it was just a really good conversation and a growing point for my dad. And my dad got so excited with these conversations because they made sense to him, but he wasn't able to repeat back to my mom what he had just learned because it was so new to him. And so that became a frustration because my dad would be so excited, and then he'd come inside and he'd try to tell my mom about all these conversations, and it would just frustrate my mom because she didn't want to think about it, but my dad wasn't able to explain it well enough for her to understand. um, my mom was not on board with leaving. My dad was starting to think about it.
Third yawn.
Is my swearing boring?
No, it's not boring. I'm just like, I don't know why.
I should also mention that there was a phone where we lived. It was not our own place, so there was a phone out in the garage. Actually, there was two phones out in the garage, and my parents would go out there to talk, or my dad would. So one time, my dad was becoming so frustrated with the fact that he couldn't relay back to my mom all the things he had just learned. So he was like, "Okay, why don't you come with me, and we're gonna both be on the phone, and you're gonna listen to our conversation, because maybe then you'll be persuaded and understand it better." So my mom agreed to that, and that was kind of her turning point where she understood why dad didn't want to be Amish anymore, and then she was on the same page. So with this new decision that they had made that to not be Amish, they had to tell their parents somehow. So they wrote letters. My mom's parents were living in Medford, where my mom grew up, or my parents grew up, and my dad's parents were living in Chautauqua. So Chautauqua was closer to us at the time. So they put out the letter to my grandparents in Medford first, and then the next day they put out the other letter, hoping they would come on the same day, but that didn't work out so well. For some reason, the grandparents in Medford got the letter first, and they obviously called dad's parents in Chautauqua and were like, "Hey, like, what's going on?" And we sent out the letter. I don't remember what day of the week, but like 2 days, not even a day after they had gotten it, they were at our house at like 7 a.m. in the morning, and they immediately.
How far away were they?
Medford was about 3 hours, I think, from us.
Wow.
Yeah, it was
That's
quite
a
a
long
drive. Yeah. And Chautauqua was like an hour or two from us.
Okay.
So both of my grandparents showed up, and I remember as a child, I was super confused. Because basically what happened was at that point there were three of us kids. It was me. I was 6. We were 6, 6, 4, and almost 2, I think.
And you're the oldest.
And I'm the oldest. So all three of us, I don't remember what my other siblings were thinking, but I just remember being so confused at why my grandparents are here and they're all crying, and I could feel the tension in the room, even as a child. And I didn't understand like what was going on. And my grandparents stayed there until 7 that night. And I just remember them talking and basically scolding my parents for doing this, but I was oblivious to I didn't understand why they were scolding them. I basically spent that entire day in the back bedroom just playing with my siblings. We had the door shut, and that we were just in there, and we came out for meal times, and that was about it. Um, then after that day, My parents still hadn't made they still hadn't made a decision to remain Amish. Um, so I think I don't remember if anybody stayed at our house that night, but then they came back the next day, and they again just scolded my parents, and they talked and talked and talked, and finally my dad was like, "Look, this decision didn't come to me in one day, and it won't leave in one day either. I'll have time. I have to have time to think about it." So anyway, they finally came to this agreement, I guess, that if my mom and all of his kids wanted to remain Amish, that they would take them, and if my dad wanted to stay or leave, like that was up to him, but they would have been willing to split my parents' marriage like right then and there because to them they made the vow to the church first, and their marriage vow came second. So that was more important to them. In order to keep their marriage together, because they knew that was the right thing to do, they both decided to remain Amish that day. But in the back of my dad's head, he still wasn't sure. But they had mostly convinced him that Amish was the way to go, and because they knew scripture verses, it threw my dad off because they knew exactly what verses to go to when dad was like, well, what about this topic or what about this? And they had a verse just like that. And so it kind of threw my dad off. And he didn't really know what he thought at the end of the day. And he was so confused. But he still thought in the back of my mind, like, I can still be persuaded, like, to leave the Amish. But for today, I will remain Amish. So this was in the fall of the year. And we were planning to move soon and like to my grandparents' farm. So I think we had already started packing at this point. And also, mind you, my mom is I think 8 or 9 months pregnant. Like she was almost ready to give birth at this point. And there was two people that ended up staying at our house until the day we moved, which was probably like 2 weeks. Um, and they helped us pack up and everything we had, and my dad then split his herd off to the different farmers, and we moved to my grandparents' farm with a trailer house and everything. And the other reason my dad was very thankful that he took care of his cows and just like got rid of them for a little bit was the reason if he wanted to leave and it worked out, he didn't want to be tied down to a whole barn full of cows. So that kind of made sense in his head. He didn't tell anybody else that, but that was kind of the reason. So we moved to my grandparents' yard. Also, the other thing, backing up a little, you might have to insert this later.
That's okay.
I was at my grandparents' house.
When?
For school in the fall. And so I was not home with my parents. Well, because we weren't in the Amish community with anybody else, there wasn't a school. So then I had to just live at my grandparents' house, which is why my grandma packed my lunch.
Okay.
So I was staying at my grandparents' house.
I didn't think about that when you had said that.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So my parents had heard of the worst, where if you end up leaving and your child is not with you, they will hold onto your child and not let you get them. So they had actually made up a lame excuse and got me home, and then they wrote the letters. So that way, if they did decide to leave, like, it wasn't a big deal. And they had, in the letters, they had just said that we were going to go be Mennonites because the man that had witnessed to my dad was a Mennonite. And to us, that wasn't wrong because, or to my dad at least, it wasn't wrong because it was just the next step up. We were still going to be in church. It wasn't like we were just going out into the world and doing whatever we wanted. We still had a good plan in place. But anyway, they talked us out of that. We moved to our grandparents' place. We started going to church. Well, my mom didn't really, my parents didn't, because my mom was about 2 weeks away from expecting my sister. And in the Amish, when you are close to having a baby, you try not to go out because, you think 15 minutes in a car, that's going to be like twice as long in a buggy. And if you're close to having a baby and your contractions start, like, who knows how long you have. So then you just kind of stay home, which is what my parents did. It was kind of perfect because my dad was starting to get back into phone calls again, and he was starting to get encouraged with reading the Bible. also, when we moved to my grandparents' house, they took all our English Bibles and told us that was the problem because you're studying too much and you're understanding the scriptures, and they don't want you to do that. They forbid Bible
then
studies.
It goes against.
Right, and then you're smart for your own,
laws.
too smart for your own good, and they want to keep you dumb so that way they can
manipulate you.
Right. So my dad was in contact with another ex-Amish guy in the area, and he asked him if he had an English Bible. So one Sunday, when everybody else was at church, he ran across the field and met him in the woods somewhere, and he got a Bible. And he went back to his house and he started reading it. My mom was not too thrilled about it, but soon they started talking again, and she was totally on board again. And my dad would sneak out for Bible studies in the evenings on Friday nights. He would go with this guy and sit in his van and just talk about the Bible and stuff. And one Friday, I remember my parents, I believe we went to bed that night, and then they woke us up because it was like late into the night when we went. My dad wanted us all to go to the Bible study, which was so risky because we lived in the same yard as my grandparents, and I was 6 or 7 at the time, and I was a huge blabbermouth, and I told everything to everybody. So that was a huge risk my parents were willing to take. At the Bible study, though, they told us to not give names, so that way we weren't able to. If we talked about it, it wouldn't really make sense because we didn't have names.
If the kids talked about it.
Like if us kids like told grandpa or something, and they wouldn't have understood us because we didn't have names to go along with that. That night, it was later in the night, so I think we went to bed first, and then my parents just woke us up, and we walked out of the door, and this was January, so there was snow on the ground because it's northern Wisconsin, and we walked out of the house and out through the ditch, and then we walked along the road and into the dead end road and waited for a ride. Usually the house going past my grandparents' house is so busy. Like, there's not a place.
Did they live on a highway?
Not like a major highway, but it was still like a county road.
Okay.
So it was relatively busy, like at all hours of the day. And that night when we walked through the ditch and out to the road, not a single car passed us until we were into the dead end road, and then it kind of felt like God opened the floodgates and the cars were going again. So it's super cool to see God work, and like even just to hear my parents talk about it. It was a faith builder for me even as a child. And so we went to the Bible study. The Bible study went great. I remember asking for their names, but they just wouldn't give them, and I didn't understand why. It was super confusing for me. But we came back. They dropped us off. We walked into the ditch, into the house. But now there's a problem with all the footprints going through the snow. Like my grandparents would see it the next morning and wonder what was up. But God provided again and covered it with a fresh layer of snow the next morning, so it wasn't even visible. It was amazing to see God work, and that was, and so we as kids, I remember like being super confused as to why we did that, but I didn't really question it. It was kind of exciting and fun and thrilling for me. So then I think about 2 weeks after that Bible study, my parents they knew what they wanted. They just needed a plan as to how to work it out, because if they were unsuccessful again at leaving, they would forever be watched as a hawk, and we'd never get a second or a third chance again. So they needed to make this run successful. My mom, of all people, actually came up with the idea of leaving at night and just kind of slipping out and disappearing. So that's what we ended up doing. We had a family in the area come pick us up. Well, the thing is, they sent all of us kids to bed to sleep. And they also had to be very strategic at which point they would leave the house, because my grandma would get up to stoke the wood stove, and it was right by a window, like facing our trailer house. So if we were out there in the middle of the night, they would have come out and like talked us out of it again. I don't remember exactly what the time frames were, because as a little child, you just do what your parents tell you. But I remember mom and dad telling us, okay, it's time to go to sleep, but don't get into your night clothes, just stay in your day clothes. And I was like, what in the world? Like, are we going to another Bible study? I didn't know. Like, I was just really confused. So I immediately went to bed, even though I was like really, I remember being so excited that I could hardly sleep, but eventually I did fall asleep. And I, then when I woke up, we were ready to go. But while I was sleeping, my parents, they packed suitcases and stuff. So our trailer house was like this. My grandparents' house was right here.
Where's the road?
The road is out here. So the door to the trailer house was on this side, which you could see. So what my dad did is he went outside, and to the end of the trailer house, there's a window. This is my parents' bedroom right here. So they would take suitcases and put them out the window, so they wouldn't have. Our door was like incredibly squeaky too. So they didn't want to use the door a ton, and so my dad would take like a toboggan or a sled and load up all the suitcases on it, take it out through the ditch, dump them out, and he made like several trips doing that. And finally, they had all the suitcases out the window, so we were ready to go. Meanwhile, our ride that we had lined up was going back, just driving back and forth on the road, waiting until we were ready. Because he didn't want to stop there, because if Grandpa and Grandma woke up, they'd be really confused as to why there's a vehicle out there. So, um,
So you got all the suitcases out, loaded up.
yeah, so we
They
had
woke you up.
they just had the suitcases all piled out in the ditch, and then they were like, "All right, let's wake up the kids and go." So they woke us up, and we got us dressed. I still remember the night so vividly. It was one of those mild winter nights. There was snow on the ground. We had a lot of pine trees there, and I still just remember it was a really windy night, and so I could hear the pine trees like, I don't know what you whisper, I guess.
Yeah, like rustling.
Yeah. Um so that, and the moon was like, it was a little bit cloudy, but the moon was almost a full moon. So you could see very clearly outside. And I just like remember it so well. And so we all got out on the porch, and I think my little sister slammed the door, and we were all like, "Oh, like stop. Like somebody's going to wake up." But nobody woke up, and we all like went out through the ditch.
Had your mom had your sibling then?
Yes, yes. My sister was 6 weeks old at this point.
Your newest one. So
yeah,
like
my youngest
you
sister.
had you and then your sister and Martha and then two other sisters.
It was me, Martha, Vernon, and then Linda was 6 weeks old.
Okay.
And so we all traipsed out through the snow, and by that time our driver had slowed down because he saw that we were ready. And so as fast as you could, they packed up the suitcases and put them in the back of the van. My dad told us later that he felt like he could hardly do it fast enough because he was just like, they're going to come any second. And he was just so scared that they would. But they got all the suitcases in, they hopped in the van, we closed the door, and we were off. Like, I don't think the whole thing took more than about 5 minutes. Um, so we went over to that person's house, and my parents took showers because it was very difficult to take showers, and you don't usually take a shower unless it's Saturday, which this was not Saturday, so it raised suspicion. So they took showers over there, and then the person that had picked us up took us all the way out to South Dakota to a friend of his, um, and that's where we stayed for like the next 10 days, just to kind of recuperate, learn.
Why do you go so far? Like you should tell them why. Why didn't you just go like to the next town over?
Well, we were afraid that we were going to be talked out of it again, and that they were going to come and cry and talk us out of it and force us to come back, um, either by splitting up the marriage or something else. So we wanted to be far enough away that they couldn't just come. And we needed to be just more established in the reasons why we couldn't remain Amish. So we went out to a family in South Dakota. I don't remember a lot from the week. I remember I got my first picture, and we got our first family picture. The picture looks absolutely terrible, but I'm glad we took it. Good memories. Um, I remember at the end of we stayed out there for 10 days, and I remember at the end of the 10 days having to pack up and come back home, um, because we had to get back to normal life. We couldn't just forever stay out there. So another family came, drove all the way out to South Dakota, picked us up and brought us back, which was just amazing because without them we couldn't have gotten anywhere. Um, we we came back and stayed with that family until we found a house in the area to rent, which was actually about 15 miles from where my grandparents lived. So it wasn't super far, but we still needed a place to stay. So now we had a house, but we still had to go back and get all of our belongings because we left everything behind. Um, so the church, the family we were staying at, their church lined up a whole bunch of people, and they single filed out of the churchyard into my grandfather's yard, and this was January, so everything is frozen stiff. It is cold outside, but within 2 hours, we had our entire trailer house packed up, and we also had a semi trailer that we had just like set on the property as storage because our trailer house wouldn't hold everything. Um, so that was still halfway packed, but we just packed up the rest. We did keep two of the cows there from our herd, so we had all of that stuff to take. But within 2 hours, we had everything moved out. The trailer house moved out of the yard along with the semi truck, or like the semi trailer. It was all gone. And well, when we started, my grandpa came out of the house. Well, he was in his shop because he's a woodworker. So I came out of his shop and walked back in the house, and then walked from the house back to the shop. He was looking for my dad. Eventually, he found my dad, and he was like, "What would you do if I would just tell you to leave? Because this is literally the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life." My dad just told him, "Look, I'm not here to cause problems, but I just want to get my stuff, and I'm not coming back in a couple weeks to come get the rest of it. Like, I'm here to get my stuff, and then I'm done. Like, I'm out." Um, so my grandpa just kind of left, and then he talked to my dad again, and he was like, "You can leave the desk we gifted you plus the china set, because all of my dad's siblings got those two things when they left the house. Beautiful desk that my grandpa had actually made. He gave each of his kids that, but he asked for that back. So my dad was like, "Okay, we can do that." So he left the desk and everything there.
So,
So we were living about 15 miles away from my grandparents at that point, and we would still have Amish people come back. Like my uncles would. They are, I think one of my uncles is a deacon. My mom's my mom's brother, and my grandpa's a deacon too. So my grandpa's place was to come and tell us that we were shunned because we were no longer part of the Amish church.
which explain like shunning so that people understand that a little bit.
Basically, if you sin against the church, usually they will come to you and ask you to make a confession in front of the church. And depending on what it was, if it was as simple as driving a tractor you weren't supposed to, or listening to a radio, or I don't know, whatever the sin was that you committed, you had to confess it and admit to the sin. And then, depending on how bad it was, they would either excommunicate or shun you for 2 weeks or 6 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever, and then they would accept you back into the church. Well, in our case, um, my dad was not willing to go back to the Amish church and tell them that he had done wrong, so they voted unanimously. Is that how you say it?
Mm-hmm.
Unanimously. Um, so they voted and decided that my parents were going to be excommunicated. My parents are shunned and excommunicated, but because I was never a member of the Amish church and neither were my siblings, we are not technically shunned. So they can't treat us the same way. They still kind of do, but technically they shouldn't. Um,
But that's how you left.
but that's kind of the whole story. They excommunicated us, and that was that. They kind of stopped coming to see us, and now we kind of have an agreement that you don't talk about your religion and we don't talk about ours when we go visit. So we can still go visit. We don't do it very often. We go every couple of years, and we the last time we went was 2018, and we were received pretty well by my dad's parents, but my mom's parents just they always cry, and my grandma barely is able to look at us because she's crying so hard, and she always just has her hanky up by her face.
Nobody really, like,
I
I haven't
said
even met any of your family other than your immediate family and your one uncle that left with you guys.
I should mention that I do have an uncle that is no longer Amish, and he lives out by my parents, or close to where my parents live right now. And he left. I don't remember how many years ago.
Couple years after you guys.
Yeah, a couple years after we did.
That's a lot. So, anyways, that's your story. That's her story. Do you want me to talk, or do you want to just close this out?
You can close it out.
Okay. That's her story of being Amish and how they left. If you want, we'll put a link down in the description. There's a video of her dad's testimony. We're planning to put out a video soon with like a Q&A type thing.
So if you have
about
more
the
questions,
Amish. So if this was the first time you ever heard anything about the Amish, or like if you've always had a question about the Amish, we would love to get your questions either in the comments down below, or find us on social media and private message us your questions or whatever. We'd love to have them in our video. And we'll hopefully be getting that out soon. We figured we'd give like the actual history and like background of her life before we did the questions and answers. Just that way, maybe it would help bring up more questions if you didn't really know anything about the Amish.
I love talking about it. I'm super excited to answer your questions.
So our next video, we'll try to get a Amish word of the day in. Man, that was a long video. We would love to bring more content. If you want to see more videos, please like and subscribe. That's a super awesome encouragement to us to continue to make content for you guys. We're hoping to start like a sort of vlog soon, and just keep you guys up to date on what we're up to. As for the announcement that we were going to do, I think it's probably going to be, it will be either the next video after this one or the one after that. Which may promise. Well, it may be after. No, I promise. It will be on the next one, or the one after that.
We're just gonna say it, or are we gonna actually show it?
We'll like tell it.
Okay.
And then if we can, we'll show it. So stay tuned for that. Super exciting for us, and it's like really hard not to tell anybody. And also, friends and family that are watching this, we are not pregnant. Please
do not assume that.
Don't ask. So, yeah. So we'll have that in our next video. We love you guys. Thank you so much for subscribing and watching our videos. It means a ton to us. Which is really funny because we always watch YouTube videos and you always hear them say, "Oh, we're so thankful for your subscription and watching our content." And like, you're like, "Yeah, that you just saying that because that's like what you're supposed to say as a YouTuber." But it really does mean a lot to us, and we mean that from the bottom of our hearts. So thank you so much. And if you're not a subscriber, consider it and click that little notification bell so you can get an announcement and a notification on your electronics when we get a next video up. So anyways, we'll see you guys in the next video.